In 2012, a rider crossed the finish line last. Same legs. Same bike. Wrong group set. He had switched brands 3 weeks before the race and never felt comfortable again. Shimano and SRAM split almost every bike on the road between them. 2 brands. Billions of dollars. And somehow the honest answer about which one is better has never been given. Not really. Today that changes. One word below, Shimano or SRAM. Go. Nobody talks about where these 2 companies actually came from. That matters. Because the way each brand was built tells you everything about why they make the choices they make today. Shimano started in 1921 in Sakai, Japan. A small factory. 1 man. Kizo Shimano made a single product, a free wheel. Not a group set. Not a system. 1 part. He made it cheaper than anyone else and sold it at volume. 1 goal. That was the entire strategy. Low cost, high output, and total control over the manufacturing process. It worked. By the 1970s, Shimano was supplying components to bike brands across Europe and America. Not because riders asked for them. Because bike companies needed affordable parts and Shimano had the factory to deliver. SRAM came 50 years later. Chicago, 1987. 3 entrepreneurs with no cycling manufacturing history and 1 idea. A single lever shifter that controlled both up and down with 1 hand. They called it grip shift. It was simple, light, and different. Shimano already owned the market. SRAM had no factory advantage, no history, and no relationships with the big bike brands. So they did the only thing they could. They made something Shimano had not made. And they marketed it directly to riders who were frustrated with what already existed. That gap between the 2 origin stories never closed. Shimano grew from the factory floor up. Every decision they made was shaped by scale, consistency, and cost control. SRAM grew from a product idea outward. Every decision they made was shaped by differentiation, finding the thing Shimano was not doing and doing it instead. By the mid-1990s, both brands were competing on road bikes at a serious level. Shimano had Dura-Ace. SRAM was building toward what would become Red. 2 systems. 2 philosophies. And the riders in the middle had no idea the choice they were making was never really about performance. It was about which company had already signed the deal with the brand that built their bike. OEM contracts, the agreements between component makers and bike manufacturers, decide what group set ships on a new bike at the factory. Riders rarely choose their first group set. It is chosen for them before the bike is built. Shimano dominated those contracts through the 1990s and 2000s simply because they could supply more product at a lower price point than anyone else. SRAM had to compete on spec sheets and story. So they made their components lighter, louder about weight savings, and easier to talk about in a magazine. The performance debate started there. Not on a road. In a boardroom. 2 brands entered the market with completely different weapons. 1 had scale. 1 had story. And every argument cyclists have had about shifting performance ever since has been shaped by that original split, without most riders ever knowing it existed. By the early 2000s, both systems worked. That was the problem. When something works, the only way to keep selling is to make sure it only works with itself. Shimano moved first. Their components had always been designed to function as a complete system. Chain, cassette, derailleur, shifter. Each part was tuned to the others. A Shimano chain on a SRAM cassette would shift, but not cleanly, not reliably. And when it did not, the rider blamed the parts, not the decision to mix them. That was not an accident. Shimano had every reason to make sure mixing felt like a mistake. SRAM followed the same path. Their cable pull ratios, the amount of cable movement per click of the shifter, were not the same as Shimano's. Not wildly off. Just enough to matter. A SRAM shifter paired with a Shimano rear derailleur would get close but never quite dial in. Mechanics knew this. Most riders never understood why their bike felt slightly off after a part swap. They just knew something was wrong. This is where the evolution stopped being about performance and started being about control. Both brands were building walls, not just components. Every new generation of group set added another layer of system dependency. 11 speed required new hubs. 12 speed required new chains. Each jump forward was also a step deeper into the ecosystem. Riders who wanted the latest technology had to commit fully. There was no mixing at the top level. The brands made sure of that. The frustration was real. Forums were full of riders trying to work around compatibility issues, swapping cables, adjusting limit screws, chasing a clean shift that should have been simple. A small industry of aftermarket solutions grew around the problem. Third-party chains, universal bottom brackets, adapter kits that promised cross-brand harmony. Most of them worked well enough. None of them worked perfectly. The wall held. Then wireless arrived. Shimano Di2 had existed since 2009 in wired form. SRAM introduced their wireless e-tap system in 2016 and the road cycling world paid attention.
No cables.
No housing. A rear derailleur that paired to a shifter the way a phone pairs to a speaker. Riders who had never cared about electronics suddenly wanted it. The technology was genuinely impressive. Shifting was faster, more consistent, and easier to set up than anything cable-operated. But wireless did not tear down the wall. It rebuilt it in a different material. E-tap components only talk to E-tap components. Di2 only talked to Di2. The ecosystem logic did not change. It got stronger. Because now the dependency was not mechanical, it was digital. Firmware updates, proprietary protocols, and battery systems that only charged one-way locked riders in more completely than a cable pull ratio ever could. Subscribe if you want the part most cycling channels never get to, because this is where it gets interesting. The product riders were sold was real. The freedom it promised was not. Here is the part nobody writes about. Not because it is secret. Because it is uncomfortable. Bike shops do not stock both brands equally. They never have. A shop that carries mostly Trek bike stocks mostly Shimano because Trek builds mostly Shimano. A shop that sells Specialized at the high-end stocks more SRAM because Specialized has leaned into SM Red at their top tier for years. The mechanic behind the counter who tells you SRAM shifts better has probably spent 300 hours working on SRAM. The one who tells you Shimano is more reliable has probably never had a Di2 battery die mid-ride because he has never sold enough of them to see it happen. That is not bias. That is just experience shaped by inventory. The brands know this. They have always known it. Shimano runs dealer training programs that reward shops for stocking depth. The more Shimano SKUs a shop carries, the better their wholesale pricing. SRAM does the same. Both programs are legal, common, and completely invisible to the rider standing at the counter asking for an honest opinion. The advice they get is real. It is just not independent. This is where the hidden trade-off lives. Not in the components. In the information. Riders make decisions based on what they hear from mechanics, read in sponsored reviews, and see on the bikes of riders they respect. Almost none of that information exists outside a commercial relationship. The magazines that test group sets are funded by the brands that make them. The athletes who ride them are paid to ride them. The shops that recommend them are incentivized to sell them. And yet the components themselves are genuinely good. Both of them. That is the part that makes this complicated. Shimano's mid-range group sets, 105 and Ultegra, deliver a level of shifting consistency that was considered professional grade 15 years ago. The tolerances are tight. The supply chain is vast. Spare parts exist everywhere on Earth. If something breaks in rural Portugal on day 4 of a tour, a Shimano derailleur hanger is findable. A SRAM red E-tap battery charger is not. SRAM at the top end is lighter, more adjustable, and built for riders who want to feel involved in the setup process. Their AXS app gives a level of customization that Shimano's system does not match. For riders who enjoy that, who like dialing in shift timing and monitoring battery levels, it is genuinely satisfying technology. The honest verdict is this. Shimano is built for reliability, scale, and global support. SRAM is built for performance, customization, and the rider who wants something beyond the default. Neither is wrong. Neither is better in every situation. The debate exists not because one is superior but because two very different companies solved the same problem in two very different ways, and then spent 40 years making sure you could not easily switch between them. The gear that wins is the one that matches how you actually ride, not the one your bike came with. That rider who switched group sets 3 weeks before his race was not beaten by his legs. He was beaten by a system that was never designed to be switched. Both brands built that wall. Both brands benefit from it. Now you know why. Like this video if it changed how you see it.